All right, everybody. We've got another very special guest for y'all. Everybody, please welcome to the show Douglas A. Burton. Welcome, Doug.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, thanks for wearing your comic book attire for this
Oh,
episode.
yeah, I have to come in uniform.
And now you're picking sides with Chris. Chris's favorite character is Captain America, so
Oh, awesome.
yeah, you get points for that one.
Oh,
think-
very cool. How about that?
Yeah.
I just read the new issue too.
Oh, was there a new issue? There's probably like five Captain America
Sam
books.
Wilson.
Oh, Sam Wilson. Okay, yeah. I forgot
Oh,
he's-
awesome.
You know, the one
How
where they
is it?
shoehorn Red Hulk in there so they have something for the movie.
They conveniently time all those things to be like, oh, there's something coming out in a movie or a show.
Yeah.
Let's put this character in a comic book.
Yeah, and it feels like it happened naturally, right?
Yeah. It's easy with the Hulk because he just busts through a wall like Kool-Aid Man, and he's like, I'm here.
That's almost exactly what happens in this issue.
That's amazing. Doug, I gotta say, I think we get a handful of novel writers on the show, but I think this one it has some ties or at least a little relativity here to comic books in general because you generally write heroic female characters, right? Is that something that you've kind of focused on with your work, or?
That's become something that has happened kind of almost incidentally.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote a historical fiction novel a couple of years ago about a Byzantine empress, and while writing it, I took another look at story structure, and that's what led me to this nonfiction book for writers,
Okay.
which is essentially it's an alternative to the hero's journey.
Mm.
So, but like you guys, my roots, come from comics, from movies. I'm a huge movie guy. I love my movies. There's a lot of great streaming shows on now for the last 15 or so years. We got a lot, so there's great television kicking in. So, it comes from, my love of story comes from those things. And they've kind of manifested themselves into the historical fiction work. And then, of course, now the Heroines Labyrinth, which is the writer's writing craft book. So, and I've got, there's a bunch of examples in there. And I made a big effort to focus on recognizable stories and films that are not obscure references so that people could immediately make connections.
And you was writing something that you knew you wanted to do early on, or tell stories, or how did that?
Yeah, I
come
would
about?
say so. I've always been real creative. I was into art for a while and everything, but I always really liked writing. And I always
Mhm.
liked movies. So, you know how it is when you're a kid, you're like, I'm gonna make movies, man.
Right,
and
right.
then there's some reality kicking in there.
I think Chris
Um,
is in the same boat. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, I mean, you have it all in your head,
Yeah.
but it's a lot of work to put it on the paper, whether it's a screenplay or a novel.
Mhm.
Both have their own nuances and challenges. So, that's where once you pick a lane, you got to do the work, and there's no shortcuts. So you got to do a lot of writing. You got to read a lot of books. You have to watch a lot of films. Go through the comic books or the graphic novels, and there's all these different things that grab you, that excite you and get you going. So you incorporate that and bring that into your writing, and that is definitely a fun process for me.
And we've talked a little bit about this with creators on the show the last few years. We see some people that dabble in, writing TV scripts and then they get turned into comic books, things like that. And I kind of understand that with comics because there's a cinematography to it almost with, setting up panels and things like that. But how would you say there's a huge difference with writing a script compared to like a novel, right? I mean, just the amount of detail you have to add. There's quite a bit more, right?
I don't want to make it sound like it's harder
Mhm.
because it's not necessarily the case. Screenwriting it can be just as challenging. You don't have the ability to set things up to the same extent as I do as a novelist. If I want to take 3 or 4 pages and dig into some interior thinking, I can do that.
Right.
If I have a script, I just don't get that space. You have
Okay.
to convey it almost all through dialogue. And there's 2 schools of thought on how much detail to include, like
Right.
interior setting, exterior setting, and you start to build it out. And I think a lot of us try to we get into that.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
I remember the first time someone was reading my script, they're like, all this needs to come out. that's the director's job. The person who's going to scout the location, they'll figure all that out. You just need to give us the structure. So, and of course, to me, that was heartbreaking because I was like, no, these details are super important. I thought of them. These are good ideas.
Mm-hmm.
So a novel lets you do that. A novel lets you build those out if that's conducive to the story. And screenwriting is very character driven, very dialogue driven. So you have to be able to convey a ton of information with very little information. So it's a skill.
And that brings up an interesting thought I just had, because with a novel you have more room to explore those thoughts. When do you know when to stop? When are you like, maybe I put too many thoughts on it?
That's what an editor is for.
Yeah. I guess you have an editor. You have an editor come in and tell you like, whoa, but like,
yeah, there's a couple fail safes for you.
Right.
One is I downloaded an app called Speechify.
Okay.
This thing is great. It has great AI voices and everything. So I will have it read back my chapters.
Oh wow.
And if you're on the wrong path, you can hear it.
Okay.
So you do have one layer of, hey, that doesn't sound right, or that's awfully wordy. I need to trim that up, or God, what am I talking about here?
Mm-hmm.
And then of course you have beta. You have like a writers group.
Yeah.
And you go back and forth, and they'll read it, and they'll tell you like, hey man, I don't know what you're talking about here. This is confusing. And and then of course you have your editor who's going to be even more hard nosed about it, and they're gonna be like, look, all this has to come out. You need to speed this up. This chapter doesn't fit. So it's a process, but you have to listen to your feedback. If someone's telling you this is going on too long and you loved it, well, you're probably gonna have to trim it if it's not connecting to the reader.
You're gonna have to get used to cutting some of the stuff you liked or thought you liked in there.
Yeah,
right?
It's famously called killing your darlings, and there's a lot of dead darlings in my hard drive.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think that's something else that's different with novels too, is you have groups like read the initial drafts or stuff like that, like alpha, beta groups, right? That come back and kind of give you a sway of like how a group would perceive your project almost.
Yeah,
so I think
totally. And unlike so with script writing, you've got the dialogue. It's so fun. Like when you think about a comic book, you can get lost in a comic book in a way that's completely unique. It's not, you can get lost in a novel, you can get lost in a movie, but getting lost in a comic book is its own thing. There's a visual world there, and you could just kind of tumble into those panels. That's very dialogue driven too. Comic books give you a little bit of both though. You can get the blurb, you can get those little windows that will give you some of the interiority, where you can see what the character's thinking. And in some comic books, that drives the drama, is that interiority, that inner thought process of the hero or heroine. So if you know what I'm saying, like I was probably at my peak, like complete obsession with comic books in the 90s. That's when I was peaked. Yeah,
when they had the most comics.
Yeah, there was so many. Well, Image Comics was huge.
Oh,
and, I was a big Dark Horse Comics fan, so there was like these indie, they were challenging the DC Marvel stranglehold at the time. And, I remember you pick it up and you start reading, and then you start to absolutely become obsessed with the next issue, and you get into that. And, it's its own thing. So if you're going to do comic books, you have to have the cinematographic, the cinematography mind.
Right.
But you also have to have the novelist in you. And it's like, I think comic books is one of the hardest ones, because you have to be a cinematographer, you have to be able to write dialogue as good as a screenwriter, and you have to have a novelist's ability to add those other layers to the writing as well. So, in the 90s, I would say comic books didn't, in the movie world, it just didn't have the sort of respect that it's got now.
Right.
Like the MCU wasn't born yet. In fact, in the 90s, you didn't even have the Fox X-Men franchise. Right. You had Superman from like 1978.
Yep.
You had the Batman hysteria from 1989. but the Batman movies kind of derailed, right? They didn't really sustain the magic of that first one quite. And then, so it was funny because I remember talking with other writers, and they're like, oh, this is kind of a comic book plot.
Right.
And I was always like, man, should I be insulted?
Yeah, right. Is that a bad thing? Like, yeah.
Yeah. But now I couldn't tell you how thrilled I was when like the MCU became like not only like kind of cool, but like ultra mainstream, like apex level storytelling. And it's like,
Yeah.
ha, comic book plot, huh? You know, comic book plots make billions now.
Yeah,
you know?
they make $1 billion every time.
Yeah, it was so rewarding when the comic book movies really gripped the whole world. The toughest part was feeling like, you know, everyone said they were in on it, and it's like, but you weren't there before, you know. You know,
you were in the comic shops, but it's
but I'm happy having everyone pile in because
I
these
love
are
it.
good things. I was happy to see them get the respect they deserve.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, definitely. It's funny that to me it came around full circle because I think it was Batman that really started that, even though MCU is the billion-dollar industry. Yeah. But Christopher Nolan's Batman is what brought the respect in, if you ask me.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
yeah,
well,
for sure.
So the first time I ever was in a movie theater and the place went crazy was Batman 1989. And I remember sitting in there and the Batman trailer came on and people started screaming. And I was like, what the heck's going on?
That's amazing. At a trailer.
So it showed me just how much people could get into this. But the Christopher Nolan Batman trilogy, I think, is the best of them because all three movies are good to varying degrees. But I don't think any of those three movies were bad. You know, none of them were bad. Like I know the third one is not the best out of the three, but to me, I've still rewatched it. It's still rewatchable to me, and I still enjoy it. But Christopher Nolan brought a certain kind of reality to it. You know, it wasn't the colorful Marvel stuff. It was kind of an ultra realistic take on what Batman might look like. You know, he was pretty militarized and you know, and I remember waiting in line for The Dark Knight, the second one, and that one blew the lid off what you can make on a superhero film. What was that? 2008?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Was it that time?
Was it that long ago now? Oh man.
God, is it? That's why I was all hesitant to say it at first.
That's why it was 20 years ago. Oh, God.
Yeah, 2000.
Oh man.
Yeah,
we're all gonna die soon. It's fine.
That's crazy. Oh my God.
Nuts, man.
Yeah, and I think that's and it's funny too because we talk about all the time how comic books have almost become like script farming for TV and movies.
100%.
Yeah, like it's a lot cheaper. Make the comic. If people are buying the comic and there's interest, okay, then we can greenlight this for a movie or a TV show. That's what it seems like now, right?
And I think comics are uniquely suited. I thought this way back in the day before it became, you know, a successful movie approach, right? Comics get to show you in their panels what it could look like.
Yeah.
You know, so when I drop it, you know, if you throw a script on a producer's table, you know, they have to read that script and they have to do all the mental work themselves to see if this is, you know, will this work? But with a comic book, you could flip that thing open and you could see, like The Watchmen. You know, they made The Watchmen back, God, I think that was 2008, funny enough as well.
Yeah.
You know, you could see what it looks like, and you're like, oh, I could do this. You know, a studio head can really get a good image of it, and they have source material for their concept artists and their costumes and everything else to pull all that together. So, you know, I don't know what took so long, but comic books are like perfect to translate into film if you have a good visionary, both in the writing of the comic book and the artist of the comic book, and then the right filmmaker who wants to bring it to life.
Which was so funny to me when those X-Men movies are coming out. 'Cause it's like you said, there's the template. We have these iconic costumes everybody wears. But hey, let's put them in leather coats.
Let's put them in leather blacks.
Yeah.
You know, did you feel, how satisfied were you when Wolverine, in Deadpool and Wolverine, where he wore the classic
when he wore the classic costume and had the cowl? Yeah, that's all we needed. We've been waiting 20 years for this. Yeah, I know.
And that was my thing too. It's not like it's Judge Dredd. Where Judge Dredd, you cannot take the helmet off. Like, under no circumstance you take the helmet off.
Right.
With Wolverine, I need it for like 4 minutes. And then he can just pull it back for the rest of the movie.
I never need to see it again. Yeah, right.
Yeah, he can hang it from the rearview mirror and do whatever he wants, man.
And that's most superheroes, especially Marvel superheroes. Like, you can put it on, like Batman, you have to keep the mask on. But, like, Captain America, you can take it off. He needs to have it in certain scenarios, but it can be off.
Right.
So you hired the expensive dude, good-looking dude to play the role. You can still show him off.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Totally.
I mean, we've gone away too. It's funny because we've seen both ends of it where, like, people hated the X-Men costumes, but then, like, we had Michael Chiklis in a rubber suit playing the Thing back in the day, which I loved. I was like, man, that's a thing, but also like it looked bad.
Yeah, totally. I was particularly like just tickled pink.
Yeah.
In Deadpool and Wolverine, all the callbacks they had. By the way, some of those were the '90s comic books that in that era that I was like with the cross and the skull. Like there was I have sitting right up there the #1 comic book for Wolverine when he's Patch.
Oh yeah.
And they brought him into the movie. I was like, oh, there's Patch. Maybe that'll make my comic book even more valuable.
Yeah. That's amazing.
But they had a whole bunch of them in there in Deadpool. So what I liked about Deadpool and Wolverine was that there was real knowledge of the comic book lore and an obvious desire to bring those images and those moments to life. Even comic book accurate Wolverine, who's like 5 feet.
Yeah, he's like 4 or 5 feet tall.
Yeah, totally. I was like, oh.
Yeah, I know. That's like, and that's all the fans want. You can do it in a good way, like they did, and it'll be well received. I mean, it's
totally.
Yeah, you just have to have the right writers with it and stuff like that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about Heroines Labyrinth.
Sure.
And what that is. So, you talked about it as like a narrative framework. So can you just give us the rundown on what this book is?
Yeah. So like in comic books, for example, the origin story of a lot of superheroes follows a hero's journey pattern, and the hero's journey is think of it as what an archetypal design is, which is a recurrent pattern that occurs in stories, like The Wise Guide, right? In one movie, it's Obi-Wan Kenobi. In The Matrix, it's Morpheus. In Lord of the Rings, it's Gandalf. It's the same archetype,
right? But
the expression of each one is different and uniquely suited to the story. So, while you could see the similarities, you can also see how distinct each Wise Guide is. That's what I love about archetypes, how different they can be expressed, even though they're archetypally the same.
Right.
So you have several archetypal designs that, when strung together, form a narrative arc. And writers love this because story structure is tricky. You can write 500 pages and get nowhere fast. I know because I've done it. So when you have something like the hero's journey and you start to build in the archetypal designs as a writer, you have the comfort of knowing that this is a step in an arc, that this is leading somewhere. You're not guessing. You're not just taking the next logical step in a story, which is what I thought story writing was. What's the next logical thing? What's the next logical thing? That can get really tedious. But the archetypal patterns have such power in them, excuse me, such power in them that when they happen, there's something that immediately resonates to a reader or a viewer. So the hero's journey features a hero that begins in his native culture. The native culture often claims the hero's labor. There's a call to adventure. The hero often refuses that call to adventure and then ultimately departs the native culture and it confronts a militant outsider villain and then returns to the native culture. That's a typical pattern of the hero's journey. And it was pitched to a lot of screenwriters, in fact, and novelists, that this is pretty much one size fits all. Like all stories can be conformed to the hero's journey. And so a lot of writers, rushed out to use the hero's journey. Star Wars famously used the hero's journey. I think that's really what put it on the map. But Lord of the Rings follows it. The Iliad follows it. Beowulf follows it. There's all the Lion King. There's all these stories that follow the hero's journey. Mm-hmm. So when I was writing my historical fiction novel, which is about a Byzantine empress, I was like, I'm using the hero's journey. This is the narrative arc. But it didn't really work for her story, and so I started reading into criticism of the hero's journey, and they were like, well, it's too male-centric. There's a male-centrism to it. It's kind of a warrior ethos, and so it doesn't always work for, let's say, female protagonists or certain female protagonists. And I was like, well, I have a female protagonist. Maybe that's why it's not working. And what I ended up doing was taking a fresh look at stories, both like classics and literature, even comic book runs, films, TV shows that all had female leads. And I started writing down patterns that I found in them, similar to like the wise guide archetype, something that recurs. And I found 18 archetypal designs. And when you string them together, it forms a narrative arc. And I put it together for notes. I wasn't trying to write a book. Right. I was just putting it together for notes to help me as a writer. But as I shared it with so many other writers, they got excited. They're like, I haven't seen this anywhere. So I was like, well, then I'll quote quickly, write this into a book. And it quickly took 4 years to put it all down. So it took a long time to get it hammered out, but I'm glad I did. And it's there for writers, mainly for writers, to assist them with their stories. You'd be surprised by how often the archetypal patterns recur in movies and books you've seen or read a million times.
Mm-hmm.
So I know you're not going to give us all of them because you read the book, but what are a few examples of like these archetypes that are different from the male ones?
Yeah. So, well, first off, I just want to have a disclaimer. It's not gender exclusive. It's important to say that because one of the problems with the hero's journey is it got pigeonholed a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
The hero's journey is a universal model. Wonder Woman follows the hero's journey. She leads Themyscira to go on a hero's journey. She has magic weapons like a hero would get. She is a warrior, so there is a warrior ethos to Wonder Woman. So hero's journey can work both ways. The Heroines Labyrinth can work both ways as well. The hero's journey famously features a departure and a return from the native culture to the native culture. In fact, Joseph Campbell calls Act 1 departure, and he calls Act 3 return. That's why a lot of movies, Return of the Jedi, Return of the King, it's the return of something. Right. So I noticed in a lot of Heroine-centric stories, this departure and return to the native culture was missing. A lot of heroines stayed in the native culture and were dealing with problems and conflicts that were right there at home. Family members, people they worked with, friends, people they're supposed to trust in a lot of cases is where the conflict was derived. And so the departure and the return were not as prominent or missing entirely in heroine-centric stories. So the conflict for heroines, surprisingly, was against their native culture. That was one of their primary conflicts. You think of like Hunger Games.
Yep.
It could be she's trying to overturn the entire social order, of her native culture in that one. That's an extreme version. But it could be simple, like in Pride and Prejudice or Jane Eyre, where they make an adjustment in the native culture to liberate themselves. That's a small adjustment, but it's still counted. The Scarlet Letter is another one. She doesn't go anywhere. Her problems are right there. So the heroine tends to immerse herself in the native culture and then rearrange the native culture in some way, big or small. So that is a fundamental difference between the two. Just for starters, that is one of the major differences.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah, I never thought about it like that. That's an interesting approach.
Well, and I mean, what's cool is Star Wars, which is famously a hero's journey story.
Mm-hmm.
Luke Skywalker doesn't even show up in that movie until the 17th minute, which if you're truly writing a hero's journey story, that would be a mistake.
Right.
So, how do you get away with it? The Star Wars, A New Hope, actually opens up with a heroine, and she's fighting her native culture. Darth Vader is part of the government that she's a part of. Mm-hmm. She's broken the truce with her native culture, and she is escaping her native culture. And the broken truce is one of the 18 archetypal designs that recurs in heroine-centric stories as well. So Star Wars opens with this archetypal design, and Vader is Leia's villain in that movie. He almost has nothing to do with Luke.
Right.
If you watch A New Hope, he just bumps into him at the end. And he's like, "Man, the Force is strong with this one," but he's not really dealing with Luke until that moment.
Yeah, right. Wow, I never thought about it like that. That's crazy.
When you focus in on heroines, even secondary characters in certain stories,
right?
And you start to look, I have found the Heroines Labyrinth that work even there. Even Éowyn, Lady Éowyn in Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings.
Her problem is with her native culture.
Right.
She's not allowed to go fight. She's confined by certain rules and traditions that kind of pen her in
Yeah.
Very characteristic of a heroine's conflict.
Wow. I've never thought about stories like Chris. I mean, you've seen Star Wars. You're one of the biggest Star Wars fans I know. Was that something you've ever thought about?
Oh, the fact that Luke doesn't show up for.
Well, I mean that, but like, Leia's archetype there. I guess I don't know. It's just something I never thought of.
I don't think I thought about it at that depth, but I have tried to think a lot about, because there's a lot of conversation on these internets about, especially female and different types of characters. And I've tried to think of why I like certain female characters and why I don't like others.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
So that has popped up because Leia's always one of the ones where I'm like, immediately, like, that was one of my favorite characters as a young kid.
Yeah.
And then, like, I go back to, like, Sarah Connor and Ripley from Alien and so on and so forth. Like, the list goes on and on.
Right.
But then there's others where I think at the end of the day, it's just I'm not the audience for some of these books, characters, whatever. But then there's others where I'm just like, I don't really care for this one. What's the difference between them? So I have thought about that in the past, yeah.
Yeah, I do believe that there are reasons. So I like that you're asking that question because, to be perfectly honest, in this day and age, if you don't like something, you can get accused of all sorts of things. And in my case, it's not true. Like, I like heroic women in fiction, but there are some that I've seen where I'm like, I don't like this one, and I don't want to say it because I don't want people to, But I have found that a lot of times the ones that I like have these archetypal patterns in them. So I think that they're resonating with viewers or audiences at that deeper level, because an archetype isn't something that you and I can make up. We can't manufacture that.
Right.
Yeah.
It has to. In fact, the Heroines Labyrinth isn't something I made up. It's not my prescription. I'm not telling people, here's how you write women. That'd be ridiculous. I'm not the right. That's not my shtick. These are patterns that are inherent in successful stories. So successful stories have these patterns, and so the heroines in these successful stories tend to be very well received. And funny enough, vulnerability is one of the most powerful tools for heroes or heroines. When a heroine is vulnerable, when she fails, when she has self-doubt, a loss of confidence, I can understand that. I have that all the time. So it doesn't make her look weaker to me. It makes her more relatable to me. And so when she overcomes it, I'm much more excited for her. But if the writer believes erroneously that the best way to portray a heroine is to always show her succeeding, well, that's not my experience. I don't always succeed. I fail most of the time. Right. So there's gonna be an arm's length distance between me and this heroine that in fact, I might even start to dislike her because it becomes less and less believable. Where I'm like, oh, come on, oh, geez. Yeah. So I do think that archetypal soundness, whether it's Hero's Journey, Heroine's Labyrinth, and there are other archetypes. I think if a writer is intuitively or consciously putting these into the stories, you're giving those heroines or heroes a chance to really connect on a primal level to readers and audiences. So when you threaten a female protagonist inside a home setting, we all react to this.
Mm-hmm. Right.
In fact, one of the archetypal designs is home as battleground. You think about Kill Bill. Where's the center of her maze?
Right.
A nice affluent residential home.
Right.
Clarice Starling ends up in a home.
Yep.
Sarah Connor is attacked in her home. Ripley is one of her villains is a homegrown person in both movies. She has to unmask Ash in one movie and Burke in the other.
That's true.
So when you put a female protagonist or male, it could be male as well, into these certain situations, we'll react to it, and we can't control that reaction. We'll just react because it's primal.
Mm-hmm.
Let me preface this next question with,
sure.
I understand toxicity on both sides of this argument, and I'm not getting into toxicity of either of these sides,
sure,
because I think there's an issue. But I do think there's a conversation we had. And it's something you said and all that. Do you think there's something to the, let's say, the honest conversation around like the Mary Sue that people have? And once again, I know it's overblown in a lot of cases, but
It is overblown in some cases, but I think to your point, it is also true in some cases.
Mm-hmm.
The hard part gets to be, when is it true and when is it being overblown or misappropriated to a story?
Yeah.
One of my biggest complaints these days is sometimes people are very quick to condemn a story if it has a female lead at all. They're just immediately turned off by it. And I'm like, well, you haven't even seen it yet. So you don't know. You just don't know. But in I think the spirit of what you're talking about, the honest discussion, the real discussion, the Mary Sue, from what I understand, came about from fan fiction in Star Trek, like in the 60s or 70s. Like, it's an old
70s.
term, actually. Mm-hmm. And they wrote I think her name was actually Mary Sue, and she was entered into the Star Trek lore with Kirk and Spock and everybody. And everyone liked her immediately. And she had very little struggles, and she just was like immediately like elevated to the same level. And I think that's where the term comes from. And it's been, renewed in this kind of age where there's a lot of heroic women in fiction, good and bad. There are some good ones too. There's a lot of good ones, in fact. The ones that don't work, in my opinion, are not allowed to be vulnerable. And I think, to me, it comes across more as what's called authorial, the author intrusion, meaning the author is stepping in and not allowing their character to experience setbacks. Right. And when that happens, you're removing the primal archetypal power and you're putting yourself in the place. You're putting the author in the place and saying, my heroine isn't going to deal with this. My heroine wins again. My heroine isn't talked down to by this person because she's given respect.
Yeah.
So that is the author coming in. Now, they might have good intentions with why they're doing it. So I don't want to erase or ignore that fact. Mm-hmm. There are reasons why authors are motivated to do this. Were a lot of women written, a lot of female characters that were poorly written, that were completely secondary or objectified. So there's plenty of examples where the writers were not giving female characters their due. So they try to correct it by removing all of these obstacles. And the result is a heroine that no one's connecting to at the same level. Ripley and Sarah Connor, which are pretty much universally beloved heroines, they got their butts kicked a lot. They lost. Even when they were being heroic, you sensed that they weren't just, you sensed that they were in serious danger the whole time, and they barely got out of there. Right. I remember the first time I saw Aliens and Ripley decides to go back for Newt. I was like, what are you doing?
Yeah, you've won. What do you mean? Like,
get out of there.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm not going back in.
Yeah, I would never go back. Yeah.
No way. So she's like, I'm going. And I'm like, oh my God, you're crazy. And she goes back in there and not only does she have to face this alien, there's a queen alien. I've never seen a queen alien. Yeah. This thing's gigantic. It's massive.
Right. Yep.
And she can't beat it. She's physically overmatched. She's outnumbered. I'm like, what are you going to do?
Right.
The writer had to have Ripley solve that.
Yeah.
So I think the writer did a good job of removing themselves and saying, well, I just want her to look good. No, they're like, she is in a pickle. She's going to have to get out of this. So she had to solve it. And even when she solved it, she didn't solve it entirely. There was a round 2 on the Sulaco up there. So, the fact that the heroine loses makes me sympathetic to her.
Right.
So when she finally wins, I am on her side 100%. The villain, funny enough, in stories, villains are the one that bat 1,000. Darth Vader never loses until the end.
Right.
And even then, he doesn't really lose. He's the one who takes down the Emperor, but Vader bats 1,000.
Yep.
And that's why we don't like him, because he's too good. Somebody needs to take him down a peg, and we're happy that when Luke finally does. Mm-hmm. So when your heroine is the one that never loses, when your heroine is the one who bats 1,000, or hero, this could happen with male characters too.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. We tend to not like them as much. There's nothing to cheer for. They're already there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I get
you
that.
Once again said something that hit me, because it's something I've been feeling for a long time, where I feel like a lot of these conversations, when people are arguing back and forth about, this, that, it doesn't work. I think people are they're not reacting to politics as much as they're reacting to bad writing. And they just don't have the and I don't mean this to insult anybody, I don't think they have the intelligence in terms of knowing what story structure is to convey that properly, so their anger comes out in these negative ways.
Well, and there is something I've noticed. In fact, this is kind of a recent discussion that I've been having. Did you guys see Arcane season 2?
I have not yet. No.
Okay,
no. That's the League of Legends show, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
I saw
season 1. Yep.
And it's one of my all-time. It's unbelievably good.
Yeah.
Unbelievably good. Now, I thought season 2 was a step down, but a lot of other people liked it. So I've rewatched it twice, and one of my thoughts was, if I watch this for about 5 minutes, it's likable. Like I could see what like this 5 minutes is really cool.
Right.
But when I stop and think about it, I'm like, oh, now that doesn't make sense, does it?
Right.
So I think some people will watch this, and I don't even know if it's an intelligence thing. I think it's just the way different people are entertained at different levels, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think you can watch a show and be entertained by it, and then later be like, but it doesn't really make sense. And then rewatch it and be like, oh, I don't know if I like this anymore. So I think poorly written shows will wear off quickly, even if you tended to like the little morsels that were scattered through it. Whereas well-written stories tend to get more powerful. They take on a greater presence in your mind and your thoughts as time goes by. So one of my greatest hallmarks is time will definitely decide. We can argue.
Right.
And what I'll usually say is, look, I'm not telling you whether you should like something. That's not fair. If you like it, you like it. There are poorly written movies that I love. Total guilty pleasure movies. I love them, and I'm embarrassed to admit them, but I still like them. So I don't want to take that away from anybody. But what I will say is there are certain storytelling flaws in some of these movies or shows that I can almost guarantee over time the show's not going to hold up. So, time will decide. So, and you'll see, like the sequel trilogy with Star Wars, which I could tell had some major holes and flaws from the writing side. I'm like, this will not hold up. And people would get mad at me. I was like, look, you can like it. I'm not upset at you. You're not my enemy if you like it. But the way this was written will not hold up over time, and I can guarantee it. And
there's
because of the mistakes that were made. So anyway, so there is a real argument to be had. And then to your point, there is also the noise. And the noise can be very annoying,
Yeah, and just to be clear, I'm not justifying anyone being an asshole online. I look at some of it and I'm like, I think you're mad at the wrong things. You just can't convey it.
Yeah, people just want to shake their fist at something. You know?
I never thought that you were on the toxic side. I definitely understood that you were annoyed by the toxicity and wanted to be able to have a genuine discussion about it.
I think there's real conversations to be had and all that. Like I'd be honest, I think there's toxicity on both sides of it, and I understand one is reacting to another's, but that's a whole nother conversation. I just think there's very valid conversations to be had in there, and it gets lost in the weeds through just people.
You're right.
And it comes to so we had a writer by the name of Kelly S. Thompson on probably a couple years ago now, and I think she was just about to write Black Widow for Marvel with a solo Black Widow book. I think she had come off of Wonder Woman maybe, or was going to do Wonder Woman. But so I asked the question. I said, because she writes very good lead female books as female characters, and I said, how do you write tips, or how do you write a strong female character? And she kind of corrected me, and it's something I've thought about too. Is like that question in itself doesn't help the situation, because it's like
interesting.
It's just in general, how do you write a good character? Or how do you write a strong character?
She's right.
Yeah. And I got humbled, and I'm like, well, I never thought about that approach, and I learned something that day. But I just felt it was, we got Kelly on the show that does this all the time. Let's ask her,
good.
And right. And I thought it was just such an amazing conversation that we had with her. So.
Well, because you asked a question, even if it was poorly framed, let's say, or an errant question.
Yep.
you asked that question for all of us,
Right?
And we all made the same mistake,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So you did all of us a favor by asking it, and she did all of us a favor by adjusting. I don't think she corrected you. She adjusted.
No, yeah.
And she gave us a chance to see the question in a new light, and I think that helps all of us when that happens.
Yeah, and I think this whole conversation too has helped. And I want to focus on you, Doug, a little bit because Heroines Labyrinth has won a couple awards, right?
Yeah.
You want to talk about that because that's pretty cool in itself. I mean, you said it's a book for writers, but I mean, obviously, it's gotten some attention there, right?
Yeah, it was nonfiction, and let me tell you, I'm a fiction guy. I like to write fiction. It was really hard to switch over to nonfiction. Let me just say that. It's like a different part of your brain at work. It just doesn't translate. But so that's why it took so long. It's a whole different thing. But I wrote it for writers, and I wrote it specifically to be understood by writers. At the end of every chapter, I have something I call like an anatomy of an archetype, where I give bullet points. Like, if you're interested in the poisoned apple archetype, which is recurrent in all these films and stories and books, here are like the top 6 most recognizable attributes to this archetype. It's delivered by the masked minotaur. It's something internal, whether injected or ingested. There's an emphasis on the eyes or the throat. And it's amazing.
Right.
And then once you read the bullet points, you see the mind probe come in for Princess Leia. You'll see Maleficent drink the poison before she gets her wings cut off. You'll see Beatrix Kiddo right before the fight that he pulls out a thing and he shoots her with the dart gun and tranquilizer gun, or Katniss Everdeen gets stung in the neck with Tracker Jacket. You'll be like, oh my God, this is recurrent.
Yeah.
So it's designed specifically to be understood easily by writers. And so I think, anyways, I guess I'm a little off track there, but I submitted it to some of these contests, to see if the judges, the powers that be, were as fascinated by all of these patterns as I was. And in the early goings, I have been rewarded, the book has been awarded with a couple awards. It won the Biba Award for the Best Writing Craft Book of 2024. They have, what's interesting is they don't have a gold and a silver and a bronze. You either win the category or you get nothing. And
wow. That's awesome. Well, congrats.
So
cool.
when it won, I was like, oh my God, that is the bet. That's awesome. It won a gold medal for the Literary Titan. And just the other day, just Friday, it got longlisted in the Chanticleer Award, which is a pretty good award. It's got a lot of academic clout behind it.
Wow.
And I submitted it for the nonfiction, and it got longlisted. So they
that's awesome. Cut
it down, and hopefully it makes a short list, and hopefully it goes even further than that.
Well, congrats on that. That's, I mean, for someone who's not writing nonfiction, right? I think you did it. You nailed it there, right? So
well, I think I'd like to think that it's not so much the writing skill, but the sincerity of the writing. How much I'm trying to communicate to writers. Like, there's like an urgent need to communicate to other writers, and that's what I hope was the part of that book that was successful.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think before we wrap up today, do you want to talk about? I think we have to talk about just a little bit Faraway Bird, just so our listeners and our viewers can know about that. What that book is all about.
Yeah, well, Faraway Bird's historical fiction. It's about Byzantine Empress Theodora. I'm a Byzantine enthusiast amongst other things, and it's a historical period that. I mean, think about it. Have you ever seen a movie that takes place in the Byzantine Empire?
No, you mentioned like no. Yeah,
it's like blacked out of like pop culture. It's so weird. It was around for 1,100 years. It's one of the longest standing. Anyway,
that's true.
I always wanted to write this story, and what's interesting is I used a lot of these archetypal designs from comic books, from movies, from literature that helped me prepare scenes with her, and at the same time include real historical details, real biographical details that actually happened. So I was able to fuse these archetypes with real life And I think the book came out really well. It came out better than I had originally thought it would. I had one thing in mind and it took this other route. And while writing it is when I came up with the Heroines Labyrinth. So that book won several awards. I'm writing book 2 right now.
Oh, cool.
And it's going to be a trilogy, and I hope I stick that landing, because I have it all in my head and it's great. It's a great story. I just got to be up to the task.
That's amazing.
And it's got an audiobook too, which is nice.
Oh, it does.
Like me.
And there's music that was written specifically for that audiobook by a friend of mine. She's a friend of mine, and do you guys remember the band Moby?
Yeah.
She was the keyboardist for Moby for a while, and
Extreme Ways, right? Extreme Ways.
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
from all the Bourne Supremacy movies. That's how I know that song. Because at the end of the movies, it goes brrr, every time Jason Bourne gets. Oh yeah, Extreme.
100%. That's him.
Oh man, that's amazing. That's so funny.
She wrote some music in the book, and so anyway, I think the audiobook came out awesome.
Yeah. Wow, that's so cool. Moby. That is a name I have not heard.
I know, right? It's been a while.
Yeah, it has.
It makes me think of How I Met Your Mother, because they had the episode where they thought they met Moby.
Yeah, they thought they met the lead guy.
Real quick, because I'm going to admit some ignorance here. I didn't know when the Byzantine Empire was.
No idea.
Oh, right.
And I think I've answered your question of why nobody talks about it. Apparently it took. The Byzantine Empire is a civilization after the Roman Empire that was considered a continuation of it. Yeah. And as we learned, Doug, in early 2024, men only care about the Roman Empire. We're obsessed with it. So everything after it's just...
It sucks because every time that meme happens, I'm like, oh my God, I'm guilty. I failed this meme.
Every time.
I am making it real. I'm making it true.
We have so many movies about the Roman Empire.
Yeah, that's in medieval Japan, medieval China.
That's true.
The Hyperborean age and Conan. But nothing from the Byzantine Empire. I think one of the closest is Bram Stoker's Dracula, which takes place in Eastern Europe, which has kind of the mystical Byzantine occultism.
Oh yeah,
I didn't even think about that.
The mystic Christianity of the East. Yeah, and and there's even a shot of the Hagia Sophia dome at the opening of that movie, but it's slim pickings.
Yeah, right. That's your slim pickings there. Yeah,
they fell the Ottomans. I mean, come on.
Yeah, so the Ottoman Empire basically incorporated the Byzantines, and it was considered lost, quote unquote, to the West as the Ottoman Empire. And when the Ottoman Empire collapsed, it was incorporated into the Soviet Union. So it really has not been opened up to the West until 1991, when the Soviet Union was gone and these countries westernized and adopted, Western democracy. So it's crazy. It's a crazy timeline.
Yeah.
But it's been on the other side of the world, figuratively, for a long time.
Well, and I'm not gonna lie here, guys. I've always been a math and science guy. I wasn't, history wasn't my strong thing in school, but I do appreciate, people like you, Doug, making interesting timelines and stories about these. So now I can go get the audiobook.
You make history come alive, Doug.
And be educated.
Well, I hope you enjoy it. It's like you'll see the wise guide. Like, you know what I'm saying? You'll see. It's funny. I don't always admit this, but there's a lot of secret little elements from Star Wars that found that, and you would never know unless I pointed them out.
Okay, yeah.
But they're there, that I drew on Star Wars.
It's blue milk.
What's that? There's no blue milk. I had to delete that scene.
Are there any laser swords? Because
no laser swords.
I'm not in.
There's 2 lightsaber battles.
2 lightsaber. Okay, perfect.
That I had to include for historical accuracy.
Chris, that was the thing we didn't know about the Byzantines. They had laser swords.
Dude, I'm looking at this map.
Christmas.
Yeah.
I look at this map from 555 AD, and this empire is insane. Like. It's like Italy and a little bit of Africa, and then hey, let's get Egypt in here, and then Jerusalem, and
oh my God.
So what made me just blown away by it? I was in high school at a study hall, and I just grabbed this book completely random. It was about Constantinople and the birth of an empire. That was the name of it. Anyway, we all know that the Roman Empire got split up, right?
Yeah,
got
right.
split up east and west. Well, while I was reading this book, I found out that for one generation, one emperor from the Byzantine Empire marched his armies back and reunited the Roman Empire. And I was like, what? I was like, no one told me. I was like, they reunited the Roman Empire?
What?
I was like, that can't be true.
Yeah.
It's true, guy. And then it, after one generation, it fell back apart.
Yeah,
but this
it felt
guy,
like it didn't stick around.
could you imagine living in Rome after the fall of the Western Empire? Your city is a ghost town, and here comes legionnaires from the East to liberate you.
Yeah.
Like, I was like, what?
Yeah.
This is amazing. So anyway, that's how I got into it.
That's wild. We're saved.
Yeah, the Emperor remembered us.
Yeah. Oh man, Doug, this has been a great time, man. I'm so glad you got to join us on the show today. If our listeners and our viewers want to follow you, all the stuff you're doing, do you want to give them a social media or your website or?
Yeah. So I have a website, douglasaburton.com. In fact, if you go to it, there's a cool video. It's about 6 minutes. It's a real quick video where I cover the Labyrinth, which is the first archetypal design, and there's like 70 or 60 different movie clips in there to really drive the point home. So you'll see Star Wars is in there, all of them are in there to drive it home. I always recommend that video because it's a good example.
Cool.
I'm also on Twitter at Douglas A or X at douglasaburton.com, and I have a Facebook page as well. So
great. Awesome.
And to everybody out there, if you're a Kindle Unlimited subscriber, Faraway Bird's free.
Yep.
Look at that.
That's right.
But Doug, well, first of all, to everybody out there watching and or listening, it's the first episode of the year, everybody. I'm a little rusty, so back off, all right?
We're still hungover.
Yeah, still hungover from New Year's.
Check those show notes down below. I'll have links to both the books and Doug's website, and of course, all his social media handles as well. So, Doug, thanks so much for stopping by, man, and chatting with us today. It's been a great time, and we look forward to doing it again someday.
Oh man, thanks for having me on. This was fantastic. I always like just talking shop with people.
Yeah, that's awesome.